Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. On today's episode, we're going to discuss maximal strength. So, let's kick it. The episode we did a couple of weeks back where it was a body comp conversation, a lot of listeners really enjoyed that one. So we're going to do maximal strength conversation today. Fortunately, I don't think it'll be as popular, but it should be more popular than body comp conversation. So, and it's also appropriate because we recently released our maximal strength specialization course online, as well as the power, but we will focus on maximal strength today. So to get us started, I think we should begin with the definition. I stole the definition from the course, but then I'll read it, but then I think we need to break it down a little bit more. So from the course, the peak force the neuromuscular system can produce in a single maximal voluntary contraction. Let's further break that down for our listeners.
Well, first of all, maximal strength should be more popular than body comp because maximal strength is
way cooler.
It is, but it's also like the basis of everything in the world of strength training. Tudor Bompa, Mike Stone, Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher, which are like pillars in the world of strength research, and like all of them, and this is just a sample of the experts in the field, but they all say that maximal strength is the most important qualities amongst all trainable qualities in the weight room. Even Schmidt-Bleicher has this popular quote in our circle, which is, "Strength is the mother of all qualities." So it is very important. So to get back to the definition, the peak force that the neuromuscular system can produce in a single maximal voluntary contraction. So what this means is the body has the ability to generate a certain amount of force, and there's a ability to generate this force in an involuntary fashion, and this is called limit strength. I mean, at least it's one of the terms used.
What are some of the other terms used for it?
Some call it absolute strength.
Which really gets confusing.
It gets confusing because absolute strength is also another quality talked about in the same circle of people, which is the amount of strength you have irrespective of body weight, which is like which kind of goes end to end with relative strength, which is the amount of strength you have in relation to your body weight. So that's why I much prefer the term limit strength. And then to make it even more confusing, some people call maximal strength absolute strength too. So it becomes very confusing. So we prefer our terms, which we did not invent, by the way. There were terms that were more used in the 80s and 90s, which, I don't know, in my opinion, it was like the heyday of
the Mecca,
just like hip hop. So anyway, so limit strength, which is the involuntary peak force that the human body can produce. And what's interesting, there's always that same example they bring up in every books you could ever read, which is if you're stuck in a situation where the adrenaline kicks in like crazy. And the example they always say is you have a mother that sees their child stuck underneath a car. The mother freaks out, adrenaline kicks in, and somehow she can move the car to pull the kid from underneath the car. So this would be an expression of limit strength, but it's involuntary in the sense that adrenaline kicked in, all inhibition mechanism disappears, so that person was able to actually lift the car.
But what they don't mention, though, is that she also blows all her joints and tendons and tears muscles. So she saves the baby, but that's the the involuntary thing is like you don't have those mechanisms to protect your body in those
the
situations.
protective mechanism is there for a reason.
Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly why you have those inhibition system that kicks in to protect the body, but then the adrenaline and drive bypasses this and the whole body blows out. But that being said, there was still like the force potential was still there. Now maximal strength, now you have that potential, which is that limit strain. Maximal strength is teaching the nervous system to be able to recruit more and more and more of that limit strength, but in a voluntary fashion, which means your own nervous system is able over time to increase motor unit recruitment and or bypass inhibitory mechanism to be able to generate more force. So that is, in essence, the definition of maximal strength. But then maximal strength is so important because the more strength you have, the easier it is to exert any other type of force or strength, should I say. For example, speed strength. So the whole speed strength family with explosive strength, starting strength, reactive strength. The more max strength you have, the easier it is to move a certain weight faster. So if your task is to move 100 pounds, well, if you bench 100 pounds, that's your 1 RM, that 100 pounds will move extremely slow because it's your 1 RM. But if you bench 300 pounds, now that 100 pound, you're able to move it much faster because it's a smaller relative percentage of your maximum. So indirectly, even without working on speed strength, you're still able to generate more speed simply because you have higher maximal strength levels. Same with endurance, the same thing. If you need to bend over a row 100 pounds for 100 reps, well, the stronger you are, the easier it will be to row 100 pounds for 100 reps. So it's a very, it's not very hard to understand. It makes a lot of sense, but that's why a lot of experts say that maximal strength underpins every other quality.
What I think people are going to, or where they struggle is, why is maximal strength different than just training strength?
Well, maximal strength, so the expression of maximal strength is truly shown through your greatest expression of force, which is typically a 1 RM. But it doesn't mean we have to do 1 RMs to build or display maximal strength. So while building strength, we are building towards maximal strength. Maximal strength is just the display of that 1 RM. So it's somewhat of a misnomer. So as long as we're building towards increasing your peak levels of strength, you are building maximal strength. But on the topic of maximal strength, I think one thing that people should always take into account is maximal strength's cool. But it's also worth noting relative strength, because if you're only focused on maximal strength, some strength goals become very unattainable. Like someone who weighs 200 pounds probably isn't going to squat 500 kilos. Like it's so
unlikely.
It's very unlikely. So if you at least take relative strength into it, so your body weight in relation to the load you're lifting, then you can set more realistic strength goals while trying to achieve your maximum strength.
So one of the other things I wanted to discuss, which kind of goes into that, is for which clients, or because we kind of did this on the body comp conversation, like when do you begin to focus on maximal strength for clients?
Everybody responds differently, but you do need to have like a solid foundation of hypertrophy and general strength before you attempt to truly dedicate your training time to increasing maximal strength. Like on a general guideline, you would say at least a year, for most, probably up to 2 years of general hypertrophy and strength before you really target it.
But you could near say it's from day one they come into the gym, because the best way to increase maximum strength for that novice client is to do the general strength and hypertrophy work, because that is what they're lacking for their maximal strength. So like the goal generally of strength training is
to get stronger,
to improve your maximal strength. So just depending where you are on the continuum of, do you need hypertrophy to keep pushing your maximal strength, or do you need to work on the neural side? Like, it's just a matter of when and where. So like anytime we're in the gym outside of pretty much fat loss phases, maximal strength is going to be addressed.
Like, the one thing a lot of people don't realize is how important hypertrophy is to develop strength. And this is why every sequential periodization model that exists always starts with hypertrophy. You need to build hypertrophy, and then that new hypertrophy will allow you to develop more strength. In the early stages of training, most of the research shows that 50 to 60% of your strength gain is a reflection of hypertrophy increase, whereas 40 to 50% of your strength improvements are via neural improvements. So if you really want to get strong, you need to first build hypertrophy, because that new cross-section area in that muscle fibers will allow you to generate more forceful contraction to build that strength and those neural capacities. Now, as training age increases, it gets flipped. It becomes more neural dominant, less architectural dominant. But that's why Porik, he's right when he's saying that it starts at day one, because you need hypertrophy to build strength. That's why we always talk about this, like in regular strength training, whenever we say standard strength with our system, what we mean is we're lifting weights to increase hypertrophy so we can increase strength. That's the nature of weight training.
Even if you look at just like your average like woman who comes into the gym, like they'll get scared if you tell them, oh, we're going to work on maximal strength, but just increasing their strength at 12 reps or 15 reps or 10 reps. I mean, it's still, I'm just saying what you're repeating what you're saying, but it works for just the average person, because if you're stronger at 15, 12, 10 reps, well, if I do decide to test you on a 1RM, which I wouldn't do with my average like ladies, they would be stronger than if they didn't do those things.
100%.
Yeah.
And this isn't to say this is what we're talking about in the maximum strength specialization course. It's a specialization course that is really honing in the intricacies to try to truly develop and drive greater levels of maximum strength with people who have already addressed these basic things. But maximum strength does start to get increased from those very early stages. It's just a matter of when and where we're trying to do it.
Yeah, and then because also eventually, so in the early stages of training, you just want hypertrophy. You want an increase in hypertrophy. And it's like a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a general hypertrophy. It doesn't really matter as long as you're increasing hypertrophy. But the more advanced you become with your training, when you're trying to target hypertrophy, the more now you need to become specific with your increase in hypertrophy, in the sense that eventually you want to maximize the hypertrophy of your high threshold motor units, which are your fast twitch fibers, so your type 2A and your type 2X, because the fast twitch fibers have way more potential for strength development than the slow twitch fibers. So your fiber distribution is highly genetic dependent. There are certain muscle that have predominantly more fast twitch than slow twitch, and vice versa. But it is very genetically dependent. I mean, some of the research in the 70s with elite athletes showed that some elite long distance runner had a 80% overall makeup of slow twitch fiber, whereas some of the most powerful athletes in like short distance sprints and throws and track and field, it was almost the opposite, like 75% like fast twitch dominant. That's drastic. So even genetically, like there's a reason why these athletes tend to have that fiber makeup, because they naturally were gifted for these tasks. But anyway, but my point is, eventually with your lifters, you need to use training parameters and or training methods that will favor an increase in the fast twitch fibers, so that you can actually, through the changes in architectural structure of the fiber, have the potential to generate more force and increase neural mechanism to decrease the inhibition signals, and on and on and on. So at first it's not really important, but eventually you need to be very clever on how you're increasing the hypertrophy in your clients.
Yeah, and then sort of with that, so since it's very general to start with, like the two most important things for the novice lifter for increasing maximum strength is increasing hypertrophy and improvements in intermuscular coordination. And both of them are going to be done actually quite well with very similar loads and intensities. So that's great.
And then, so just as listeners, when you're talking about this, you're saying focusing for the novice on maximal strength. It's still just utilizing what we teach in kind of like the foundation bundle or level 1.
100%. Yeah. So it is just very basic lifting. There's nothing overly fancy. But so since their intensities are going to be overall lower, it's going to be a better position for them to have increased intermuscular. So how each muscle group interacts with each other, coordination. So they're just going to get better at the skill. And like, I'm pretty sure Christian Thibodeau calls that strength skill. Pavel Tazzolini calls it greasing the groove. Like, it's just things that people have done for years and years and years to increase the skill of the lift without being overly, if it's not brought to failure, without being overly taxing. And what's funny is, while it's really important for novices to improve their maximum strength, it then becomes important again for the more advanced trainees. And while it's still good for them on an intermuscular coordination standpoint, it's also great for them on the unloading and reducing the stressors of the training week, so you can get more practice at the specific lift while not causing excessive fatigue, since they're all very strong. So it's like you near come full circle, and the intermediate's nearly the hardest part, because you're not strong enough that you mightn't need the unloading, so you can be pounding heavier weights. So it's near goes, you need to emphasize the intramuscular coordination and the hypertrophy, and you can just intermediate level, you can fucking hammer heavy weights for relatively heavy weights for yourself at that time, and it's not heavy enough to cause too much a dip in the recovery curve, so you can still keep making progress. And as you get more advanced, now you have to be smart and implementing these changes of loads to mitigate fatigue and really manage everything. So it's sort of a full spectrum.
And to add to what Porrick is saying, the unloading component of the advanced trainee, so it's actually very beneficial to unload to much lower intensities, even if you're advanced, for all the reasons he's saying. But also, it's very important to kind of help rebuilding or improving connective tissue resiliency, because now you're stronger. So now you're withstanding much heavier load. So it's much more drain on the connective tissue and the tendons and ligaments especially. So if you're reducing the intensity and increasing the time under tension and unloading mesocycles, and by unloading, we're not just talking about
like 1 week
intensity. No, we're not just talking about intensity. Okay. We're also talking about volume. We're also talking about intensity. Yeah. So you might do an actual mesocycle of traditional hypertrophy at, let's say, 70% of 1 RM, but now it allows you to have long enough time under tension to affect changes at the connective tissue level by increasing like collagen buildup in the tissue, and on and on and on, to be more resilient for your ongoing high load training.
Yeah. Or you can unload within the microcycle just to be affecting volume load throughout the full week and throughout the mesocycle, just to allow for better recovery. So there's loads of different ways to do it.
Yeah, 100%.
I think this is kind of just like a side note of this discussion. I think one thing that's so important, and often many people rush in our industry, is like having patience with your progressions in the weight room, and even like what you program for your clients. So with this specifically, we're talking about maximal strength, which we're saying, okay, you're starting with it, you're focusing on it as like a byproduct of just normal strength training, but you're not rushing into the maximal strength specialization content with someone after just training them for 3 months. 3 months for a beginner isn't that long. And I find so many people rush through that process. And I get it. It's hard. Patience isn't easy, but I think it's so important if someone's really looking to have long-term success in the weight room.
Yeah, and it always comes down to to my definition of, are you training or are you working out? If you're training, it's because you're really looking for actual tangible improvements. If you're just working out, you're looking to have fun, being entertained, so you can do whatever. It doesn't matter as long as you're sweating. Cool. But if you're training, you need to take the time needed to truly affect change in a positive manner so that you can truly improve over time. And like you said, it takes time. It's a step-by-step build up. That's why most of the old school Eastern Bloc with their athletes, it was a very regulated, slow-moving process to be able to get to the greatest level of performance. So if you have serious clients, that's how you need to look at it.
Yeah.
A lot of people, that's like when you just talk to the average person and they're like, oh, do you lift heavy? And I'm like, well, sometimes. It's like, well, I don't lift heavy anymore. But they just think that like one day you decide to go into the gym and try to do a 3 RM. I'm like, no, like it takes weeks, it takes months to build up to that. Know your weights, progressive overload, warm up sets, 10% spread between the first set. Most people just don't do that. And that's why I think they're scared to train like that maximal strength. They just don't get it.
Yeah,
I mean, not the people who train with us, obviously.
There's also different definition with people of what training heavy means. Because so early on in my career, like I started reading training books at the age of 11. So my understanding of training was a little different than the average person. But you talk to the average person and they talk about, oh, I lift heavy, but they're doing 15 reps. Well, that to me, it's not lifting heavy, but they're lifting heavy for their 15 reps. Well, I hope so, because if you're lifting light for 15 reps, well, then you're not doing anything.
So basically, we're always lifting heavy. It just depends on what reps you're doing.
Only if you're bringing the set near failure.
Yes.
Yeah. So, anyways, but. And I like to bring this back to the topic like every now and then, because it's such an important thing. But people need to understand, Jürgen Hartmann and Harold Tuneman's book, like early 90s, like they show through their research that the untrained person can at best recruit 60% of their motor units. So you can, in order to be strong and in order to be efficient, you need time to train your ability to recruit more motor units so you get closer to your potential. That's how you can really become really strong. But to do this, you need rehearsal, you need time, you need a certain amount of frequency, you need proper loading. And the problem in today's world, because we're subjected to so many different training modalities, we're talking about different exercises with barbells and dumbbells. We're talking about a plethora of machines. We're talking about vibration plates. We're talking about this and that and functional training. This, so people are jumping around, going all over the place, subjecting their body and nervous system to a wide range of things, which is cool because it's fun, but the problem, it takes you away from rehearsing and repeating the pattern, the skill that you're trying to improve. And I always like to say in class, it would be similar to teaching a kid to throw a basketball, but every other day you show them a different shooting technique. And then you wonder why he's not improving. Well, he's not improving because he's not rehearsing the proper way to shoot for that person. They're just doing a wide range of stuff, so there's no learning. Training is a skill, so that's why you need to choose exercise that have a lot of bang for your buck. which at the end of the day, though, our classic barbell and dumbbell exercise, they've been here for 100 years. They're going to be here for the next 100 years. So
The weights.
Yeah, and to build off that, then the more novice you are, the less variation in those exercises should be. They need the rehearsal. They need those same exercises to come up over and over and over again, which may look very boring on paper, but it's what they need to technically get good at those lifts. So when they are training at higher intensities, there's not going to be technical breakdown or less likelihood of technical breakdown. So they can recruit the higher threshold motor units and not ingrain bad movement patterns. So they really need it. And as you get more advanced, more variation becomes not only beneficial but necessary on a recovery and tendons and ligaments and movement pattern discrepancies standpoint. So
yeah, and I'll give you another example that bugs me, bugs the hell out of me. In the youth sport training world, there's a lot of things that bugs me in that space. But the flywheel, for example, a great device. It's a great concept. It's awesome. But what does the flywheel do? What's the purpose of that?
it speeds up the eccentric.
Yeah, so
Overloads it.
We're overloading fast eccentrics.
Yep.
That's great. But how many 14-year-olds are at that level?
Zero.
So the strength coach is skipping a ton of steps, subjecting the trainee to something they're not even ready. They barely have intermuscular coordination. They definitely did not improve significantly their intramuscular coordination. No firing rate coding development. No joint resiliency. No significant increase in type 2 fiber hypertrophy. And now, let's go do fast eccentric when you squat like half your body weight.
Yeah.
Because it looks cool.
They must look terrible, though. Like, think of all the 14-year-olds that we've seen, like even in HB and stuff. I can't remember that kid's name. But anyways, like you ask them to do a squat and there's like no coordination. The knees come in, the background. Like, how are you going to... I don't understand why they do those things.
And like, I know they'll always go back to it's preparing them for the demands of the sport because they still are playing the sports that does that, but it's such an advanced thing to train fast eccentrics, and the flywheels are such a novel device that you're training through weightlifting specific movement patterns that they don't replicate sport anyway. So if you want to train fast eccentrics to prepare for the demands, why not do something like depth landings? Like, not from anything significantly high, but it is going to prepare the athlete way more specifically for the demands of the sport in relation to their own body weight, and you can mitigate how much force is going to be applied by the height of the drop. And fine, yeah, you've now achieved what your goal was with the fast eccentrics without buying a new piece of equipment for 14-year-olds and without them going through a shit ton of really bad movement quality reps.
Yeah, there's a lot of great devices, but they're used with the wrong population all the time. It just bugs me, man. It's like, but we need the kids, like they see their pro athlete idol, like they see Alvin Kamara juggle on a Swiss ball. We need to do this. Well, no wonder why so many kids fail in sports nowadays.
Going back to maximal strength.
The basics. Do the basics first.
Do we want to go into briefly, I know we're not going to get into the specifics of the course, but do you want to discuss periodization?
Well, periodization for maximum strength is, obviously you can pretty much use any model if that is your chosen model. Certain things are going to work better, and what we tend to lean towards, like outside of the novice, we're probably not going to use linear periodization for maximum strength. You're going to lose too many of the adaptations trained early on with the later stages. If it's very short term, like say someone's trying to peak for a powerlifting competition, that's fine, but it'd be a shorter term. It'd probably be more likely 8 weeks. If you're going to use linear periodization in that standpoint, we're not going to use a 12 or 16 week linear periodization block. But outside of that, we can use our undulating. You can use different models. The main thing is, if we're now talking about more intermediate and advanced trainees, that we want our relative intensity for the full macro cycle to be slightly higher. So maximum strength is best developed over 80%. So if our macro cycle intensities for on average are above 80%, we know that training is going to be more beneficial towards maximum strength. So there's going to be a higher neural recruitment. There's going to be more intramuscular coordination benefits. So that means we're probably going to be going between two different training goals, and that's going to be absolute strength or relative strength. So absolute strength is the increase of force capacity irregardless of body weight, whereas the relative strength is the increase of force while taking body weight into consideration. So both are really important. The absolute strength is going to allow you to drive hypertrophy a little more, which is needed for continuous maximal strength improvements, whereas relative strength is going to allow you to be more neurologically efficient. Like absolute strength will still build the neurological capacity, but relative strength will be much more neurological specific. So the combination of these two goals over a long-term plan is really going to drive maximum strength to the peak levels long-term.
Yeah, and this goes along with the strength deficit concept. So it goes back to what
Is that the circles?
That's the circles. It goes back to what I was talking in the intro part.
The donut.
So the limit strength. So your involuntary versus voluntary strength level. So I always to explain it to students, I use circles. So I draw a big circle. So that's your potential, your involuntary strength, so your limit strength. And then within the big circle, you draw a smaller circle, which is your current voluntary strength, so your maximal strength. So the goal is, through proper training modalities, is to increase neural capacity so that you can recruit more of that potential. So over time, through proper strength training, that little circle grows bigger and bigger and bigger in the big circle, to the point where there's barely any space left within the big circle. Once you reach that point, okay, which is just an example, but once you reach that point, then to further train on highly neural capacity, you're not going to be able to increase your strength much because you already tapped out your potential. Now, the only way now that you can increase that potential is by increasing hypertrophy. So by increasing hypertrophy, now the big circle gets bigger. So now you have more space left within the big and smaller circle to now train on neural capacity to fill in the gap again. So that's why the absolute strength component is important, because the absolute strength will allow you to gain more hypertrophy in the high threshold motor units, so that afterwards you can use super neural training modalities to catch up that newfound hypertrophy. So that's why you can't just do pure strength forever.
When you're saying like super neural training,
he made up a term. That's what happened.
but what are you referring to?
Like really high intensity training, like phases.
Heavier, but you are saying like heavier weights.
Yeah, like mesocycles upwards of 90% of intensity. Those will really, really develop, like most specifically rate coding, which is like a limiting factor eventually for strength development.
Yeah, and then like the use of overcoming isometrics would be another example of super neurological training.
Yeah, and or
like the name of a book,
and or supramaximal eccentrics, which this would be the ultimate in terms of neural capacity, because supramaximal eccentric allows you to go significantly above your 1RM.
Yeah. And it's still definitely a balancing act between it all. So again, you're not just driving yourself into the ground with the training.
Yeah, and then the coaching becomes extremely important, because now the coach needs to be able to read the trainee and identify what's the best periodization model or phase duration for that trainee to keep improving.
Yeah.
Like some people, like they're actually able to keep driving high intensities for a fairly long period of time, whereas some other people, like after 2 weeks, you need to back off. So, but that's more of the art of coaching aspect of things.
Yeah.
And then there's like another factor for maximum strength increase is just like frequency that you train the lift. So some people got really, really strong with very, very high frequency training. So they'll squat, bench, and deadlift 3 times a week for powerlifting examples. But that needs a different training approach to, say, our style, where at most you're squatting twice a week, but we normally rotate exercises way more often. So we can push way harder in each training session and train with higher intensities and closer to failure because we're rotating through more exercises and we're mitigating fatigue in other manners. Whereas if we're trying to do the same exercise at a higher frequency, you have to be much more careful with your load selection to mitigate fatigue throughout the week because you're tapping into very similar motor units way more often. So it's both can help develop maximum strength, but you just have to take a different approach about how you do it.
And and this is also one of the reasons why we like the upper-lower split, is it allows you to have more targeted recovery periods as opposed to full body all the time. If you're doing full body all the time, there's no way that you can load your training sessions the way we load our training sessions and actually recover.
Yeah, like in the research when they're doing the daily undulating periodization with the full body, they end up finding that the most beneficial way of doing it is that you're training hypertrophy, strength, and power all within 1 week. But it's really because you're mitigating fatigue and managing training loads throughout the week. And it's actually the most beneficial they found, well, up to recently anyway, was you train hypertrophy first, then power, then strength, because you're really mitigating fatigue throughout the week in that format, because the power's really serving as a unloading training session.
And and even then, William Kramer's research on that model proved to not be very effective.
Not compared to other models, yeah.
So many models.
Yeah.
So we'll briefly go into then the program design component of it. I don't know how you want to touch on it.
Well, there's loads of ways to touch on it because like for more novice trainees, it's going to be very, very reminiscent of exactly how everything's taught in level 1.
Yeah.
As you get more advanced, you're going to be dedicating more time to your A series, and you maybe have to pull volume away from B or C series or both. So we want more rehearsal, so we're going to have to complete more sets at these lower reps. So like say we're trying to specialize on a lift, and that's when really a high amount of sets really becomes useful, because you're getting a ton of rehearsal at higher levels of intensity. So say you're doing 10 sets of 2, whatever it is, like that's a lot of reps, or a lot of sets for 2 reps. At that stage, you don't have time to do a C series. So you better have ticked all the boxes in previous phases to make sure all your movement patterns are good, all your remedials are good. You have no real massive areas that are lagging behind that are going to limit your strength potential, because you have to dictate so much of your training session to practicing and rehearsal the skill of that exact lift that you have to pull away from the smaller muscle groups. So that's one big thing about maximal strength, is once you get into those high sets, you better have
readjust the sessions.
Because the thing to not forget that there is a minimum volume threshold. So in the level 1 certification, you're within a year you're going to have very few phases that are above 90% of 1 RM. So, which means that your average 4 to 6 sets for the primary exercise will fit most of the intensities required for that type of training. But once you're truly targeting maximal strength and you're more intermediate to advanced, and now you need to dig into that 90% window, well, you need more than 6 sets in order to hit the volume threshold anyways. So you have that rehearsal component, but that rehearsal component is really dictated simply by the fact that you need to hit a certain volume threshold to truly build that strength.
Yeah. And then also in the program design aspect is, if we're trying to display strength, we then have to mitigate fatigue, because the fitness fatigue paradigm, you can only, or your fatigue mass fitness. So we have to make sure we're mitigating fatigue at some stage. So that could just be that we're reducing overall volume in certain phases, that so we're going to have a better display of strength at the end of the phase. We could also want to really double down on where our training volume goes. So that could be, again, assuming that all the remedials are in good order, that we're going to spend more time on our assistance lift, because it's going to drive way more specific carryover to the primary lift compared to any remedials. So it could be that, say you have 5 sets or 6 sets in your A series, you could do 4 to 5 sets in your B series on your assistance lift, and that's you done for the day. So it's only 4 exercises, or could be 2 or 3 exercises, depending if it's a lower body day. But they're highly, highly targeted towards improving the primary lift.
Yeah. And I'm sure in terms of training methods, it's a lot of the specialty techniques like we used to have in the specialty technique seminar. It's the utilization of those types of methods to drive maximal strength.
Yeah. So like a lot of the isometric, eccentric, and some type of concentric method that we talk about in the specialty technique course that you use for max strength development, like with like a concentric specialty technique that we like to use that we don't talk often a lot often is static overcome by dynamics. So heavy inertia or heavy dead stop with assistance work or even primary work is super beneficial for max strength development. Even more so if you build yourself up to do that inertia or dead stop from the disadvantaged position.
So the bottom range of the motion.
Yeah, because this drives a lot of neural concentric component.
Right from the start.
Yep.
to go.
Because you have no choice but to teach the brain to recruit a ton of motor units in the early stages of the contraction. So it becomes challenging, but it really drives neural output to a much greater rate.
Yeah, it's so obvious once you actually do those types of methods correctly, because it's always, I've done them now, and you're under the bar and you're like, shit, I got to use everything to move this. And then the first one is hard, but then, then you find it and you're able to then do more, and it doesn't feel as hard as the first one.
Yeah, the first one is always the hardest because you have zero, because you're starting off the pins. Yeah. So there's zero elastic energy built within the tissue. Now, as you keep doing more reps, if you're only doing an inertia with 2-second pause, you're always going to have about 50% elastic energy. But that's why the dead stop is really more of a challenge, because the dead stop is a 4-second pause. Yeah, so you're dissipating it.
Yeah.
But if you do have a trainee who is always very loosey-goosey, especially the upper body lifts, is a great way to reinforce like full body tension, because if you're don't have full body tension, that is not budging from the pins, especially with like lower reps and higher weight. Like if it's 70%, you're probably going to be able to do it no matter what. But if you're over 85% with those dead stop or inertia techniques, it's not going to budge unless you've already created full body tension.
Even with the squat from pins.
Oh, cool. Yeah, but that's...
I've seen people try to do it and like just...
Like we see it like during courses, like students, like they're squatting, for example, and they're holding the barbell like this. Yeah. They're not grabbing the barbell. Well, if you're holding the barbell like this, like we know for a fact you're not creating enough tension in the upper back to generate your maximum level of force. So if you're doing inertia on a squat, you're quickly going to learn to grab that barbell and stiffen up your upper back.
Yeah. Especially if you're, well, it's not going to have the same specificity, but if inertia from the bottom, squat with a safety bar, tries to kill you. Your upper back just wants to collapse because that safety bar just dumps everything forward on. But it's a good one.
That's a good one.
So I don't know. I thought it was really cool when we filmed the course a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you kind of want to give a general overview of what you introduced with the exercise selection with the general to specific. Just because I don't know I know you don't want to give it all out.
Well, I'll let Porik go with that one.
So
don't give out all the goods. Just I want you to explain the concept of the general to specific for exercise selection.
So the concept is the more transfer you want to a specific primary exercise, the more your assistance exercise has to replicate it. So if we're going to be if we're just trying to build general strength, a very general exercise would be a very good way of doing that. So say for overhead press, you're trying to build an overhead press, Z press with one arm with the dumbbell would be a very general overhead pressing movement. But standing, thick grip, close grip overhead press would be very specific. It's not 100% specific, but it's still an assistance exercise. We don't need to replicate the actual movement. But moving from a very general exercise towards a more specific exercise is going to build your general strength, general hypertrophy, and then as you're getting more and more specific, you're going to be building very specific hypertrophy and strength that is going to have even more carryover to your primary exercise. So we manipulated the exercise selection within the macro cycles to build towards higher peaks of strength in these primary exercises in very specific manners that match the goal of the macro cycle, match the goal of the mesocycle within the macro cycle, and then match the microcycle setup within the microcycle setup within the macrocycle. It's a very cool structure that will produce really, really good results, especially when done in the systematic way that's laid out, because it's done over a slightly longer periodization plan than normal. We're trying to develop things looking at two macro cycles together instead of just a one-off macro cycle. So if it's done over the course of the two macro cycles, you'll get really, really, really good results on that specific lift.
So like to take his progression example, just so that the listener understands a little bit better. So our specific is the standing overhead press. So you're standing, grabbing the floor, creating tension with the lower body, tension at the core. Now you have a mid grip on the barbell. The humerus in the bottom position is 45 degrees from the torso. You have that mid grip. As you're pressing the barbell, it's a 29 millimeter barbell. So the bar path is very close to your face, and then you're extending over your head, and your hand, as it's extended, is at the same position as it was in the bottom on a linear path. Now, we take the seated one-arm Z press. Now you're taking the legs out of the equation. So now you're creating even more demands on stabilizing the trunk. We're using one dumbbell, increasing neural drive to one limb, which might help affect left to right discrepancies. But because you only have one dumbbell, now the hand path, now you're able to get closer to your head on top instead of being this because you're fixed on a barbell. So now the scap is moving through a wider range of motion. So now we're developing strength in the surrounding musculature, but in a very non-specific to the actual pattern of the barbell overhead press. But now you're getting closer, you're getting more specific with the standing close grip thick bar. So now you're using your feet. You have to create tension in the lower body. You have to stabilize the trunk. But now you're using a thick bar. So the barbell diameter is pushing the overload a little bit more in front of your face, which changes the motor unit recruitment pattern. Now you're more of a close grip. So now the elbow is more in. Now you have a little bit more tricep involvement in the early stages of the movement because you have more elbow flexion. So now you're developing musculatures that are not specific to the barbell overhead press, but that are muscles that are important to the performance of the overhead press. So now you've developed a bunch of stuff from general to specific that will help or will translate to improvement in the standard overhead press. Meanwhile, in certain situations in the early stages, you might still be rehearsing the actual pattern because you might be using that progression with assistance work. Whereas somebody who's more advanced that nails the motor pattern can afford to train these variations as a primary exercise and still reap the benefits.
Yeah. I just thought that I really liked that whole section in the course. It was towards the end of the day, so my brain really needed to focus. I was nearing the end, but then when I went back to the course as I was editing it, it like made more sense to me. Okay, so we are approaching the end of the episode. Are there any final points anyone would like to say on the topic of maximal strength?
Maximal strength takes years to develop.
Yeah, again, patience.
Yeah, this is your lifetime training goal. Yeah. It's not a 12-week training goal. This is what you train for forever.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part to bring it back to how we have the maximal strength specialization course. Like we were saying, you're not rushing into this with a new client that just gets started in the weight room with you. This is
for the
long term.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maximal strength. Like one story that to me exemplifies exactly why maximal strength is so important. I was listening to Gregory Hoff, he's an excellent strength researcher, and he coaches certain athletes in Australia, like netball athletes, a wide range of athletes, and he was pushing one of his female athlete to get to that 2 times body weight squat standard, which is a pretty known strength standard for power sports. And the athlete was also a exercise science student, and that athlete was kind of like, whatever. It's like, I don't really believe in this. I don't really believe it. And she was like at a 1.4 times body weight squat or something like that. And Greg Hoff kept pushing that athlete to improve the squat. And then eventually she got to the 2 times body weight squat. Then she went to Gregory Hoff and she said, I get it now. Yeah. She's like, now she actually saw a drastic difference in performance and recovery rate, simply because she reached that, weirdly,
the magic number
of 2 times body weight squat. Because, even at one point she was at 1.7 times, but it was really when she reached that 2 times body weight squat that she saw a marked difference. So it seems like it's a magic number, but that's why for us, it's one of our main strength standard. That's a target. I'm not saying you need to be this tomorrow or you need to be this at all, but if you
don't rush getting there.
If you want to be a super high performing athlete, especially in power sports, it is a pretty good target.
Yeah, and it's sort of why I brought up relative strength indicators earlier on. Like, it's cool having a 500-pound squat, but if you're 400 pounds to get there, not as cool.
Yeah. Okay, couple wrapping up points. So again, we did recently release our maximal strength specialization and power specialization online courses. You can purchase both of those together in the advanced strength specialty bundle and receive a 15% discount when you purchase them both together. I want to give a big shout out to everyone for their support during our annual Black Friday and Cyber Monday. It was awesome. A lot of you did grab those courses. A lot of you grabbed all of the other online courses as well. Be sure to check out trainkilo.com. Porrick and I are repping our limited edition Jacked and IMCA shirts. Can show it, Porrick, the greatest expression of jackness. Jacked. Upcoming courses to kick off the new year. We have the Strength Assessment Workshop, January 25th to the 26th. We have the PAB, Progressive Anatomical Adaptation Seminar, February 1st to the 2nd, 2025. And then the Sports Performance Seminar, February 22nd to the 23rd, 2025. So it was awesome. So far, every single course next year has students in them.
Nice.
So the ones later in the year aren't as full, but we know those will fill up as we move forward. The body comp, the PAB, the sports performance, we are ready to kick it off with you in 2025. Anything else?
All new content.
Yeah. They're all new.
And then we are always still working on new projects, future things. So we have some exciting new projects in the works, hopefully released end of this year, start of early new year. And yes, more online content is coming. As always, subscribe, like, leave a comment. Thanks for tuning in, fam.